Mr. Speaker, today I'd like to speak about what our government is doing to support prosperity for all Canadians and how the Canada-Honduras Free Trade Agreement is part of the bigger picture. The Canada-Honduras Free Trade Agreement is another step in fulfilling our Conservative government's ambitious pro-trade plan. International trade is critical to the Canadian economy, and we need to ensure open borders for our exporters. Mr. Speaker, 1 in 5 Canadian jobs is related to exports. Freer and more open trade ensures that we can support domestic economic growth and new jobs. Our Conservative government has always been a supporter of free and open trade. For this reason, our government made it a priority to diversify our international trade negotiations agenda and place increased focus on concluding regional and bilateral trade agreements, such as the Canada-Honduras Agreement that we're discussing today. These agreements are complementary and, in fact, strengthen the important work of the WTO. Now, it may surprise many Canadians to learn that in 2006, Canada had only had free trade agreements with 5 countries. Our government recognized this situation was not good for Canadian companies, especially small and medium-sized enterprises, which are depending more and more on international markets for their success. Lack of competitive access to global markets was putting Canadian exporters, investors, and service providers at a competitive disadvantage. This was especially apparent when key competitors from the U.S. and the EU were already enjoying preferential market access. It was clear that the Government of Canada needed to act. This is why we introduced the Global Commerce Strategy in 2007. The Global Commerce Strategy was focused on expanding our global trade network, strengthening Canada's competitiveness in established markets, while also expanding into fast-moving emerging economies. The strategy supported Canadian company participation in international markets, in particular helping them to seize opportunities as part of global value chains. It's also identified markets in which Canada should focus its trade negotiating capacity. Now, our Conservative government has concluded new free trade agreements with 9 countries. That is something to celebrate, Mr. Speaker, beginning with the European Free Trade Association, member states of Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and Switzerland. It was followed, Mr. Speaker, by Colombia, by Jordan. This is fine. Thank you. Thank you. Followed by Colombia, by Jordan, by Peru, Panama, and of course, most recently, Honduras, that we're debating today. Of course, the landmark Canada-European Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement, which once ratified will mean that Canada has free trade agreements with 42 nations. Now, Mr. Speaker, the EU, the CETA agreement with the EU, took some time to negotiate. The Europeans, having brought together 27 countries, now 28 with the recent addition of Croatia just less than a year ago, they have extensive experience in negotiating agreements as they brought this coalition of 28 countries together. And so for Canada, it's a tremendous credit to our Department of Foreign and Affairs and International Trade and our own minister, the honourable member from Abbotsford, that we have developed tremendous capacity and experience in advancing trade agreements. This is a major achievement, but we won't rest on our laurels. We recognize the success of the 2007 Global Commerce Strategy, and in 2012 Economic Action Plan, we confirmed our intention to build on success. It's important to us that we respond to the evolving needs of Canadian companies. We don't deliver strategies in a vacuum. We get out there and talk to business. Now, Mr. Speaker, that's one of the reasons why our low tax regime is so important to Canadian businesses. And the Honourable Finance Minister reported to be the best finance minister in the world by some. And we give him credit for helping to keep our taxes low in Canada that creates an environment for business to prosper and for Canadians to do well. And I'm sure members might remember that the average Canadian family, because of over $160 tax cuts that we brought in since forming government is now, the average family is now saving $3,400 each and every year, Mr. Speaker. That's a pretty tremendous accomplishment. In fact, Mr. Speaker, it was Bloomberg Business Magazine that recently said that Canada is the second best country in the world with which to do business. That is something to brag about, Mr. Speaker, and the work's not done. There's lots more to do. It's a very competitive world, and that's exactly what these agreements are about. They're about creating opportunities for our businesses, the small, the medium size, and the large enterprises to engage with the world, and for countries like Honduras to engage with Canada and to expand and strengthen the family of nations through trade. So we conducted consultations right across Canada. We engaged with around 400 businesses and industry stakeholders. They weren't just large corporations, but the small and the medium-sized businesses that are the lifeblood of the Canadian economy. And that's why we're so proud of the Global Markets Action Plan that we launched in November 2013. This is not some bureaucratic exercise. It is a concrete plan for Canadian businesses developed with Canadian businesses. The Global Markets Action Plan focuses on our international economic engagement by identifying priority sectors and markets. It also underscores the importance of economic diplomacy. And of course, it aims to help Canadian small and medium-sized companies expand their global reach. Through this government's initiatives, we want to support Canadian companies, whether they export goods or services, whether they want to invest, to be competitive in new markets. Speaking of new markets, our government has long recognized the growing importance of the Americas. The Prime Minister confirmed this when he made the region a foreign policy priority in 2007. Increased trade and commercial engagement is part of the Prime Minister's vision for a more prosperous, secure, and democratic hemisphere. And it makes economic sense to Canadian businesses too. Total trade between countries in the Americas and Canada increased 32% from 2007 to 2012. Not to mention that Canadian direct investment was up 58.6% over the same period. That's why we want to deepen trade relations with countries in the region, such as Honduras. Our government realizes that we needed to get results faster for Canadian companies, so we moved to bilateral negotiations with our most ambitious partner, Honduras. In August 2011, the Prime Minister was able to announce the successful conclusion of our free trade talks. The Prime Minister recognized the importance of this agreement. He confirmed that the Canada-Honduras Free Trade Agreement was a key part of our government's agenda to open new markets for Canadian business, to create new opportunities for our workers, and to contribute to Canada's future prosperity. Mr. Speaker, could you give me an indication of how much time I have remaining? Thank you. This free trade agreement provides numerous benefits to Canadian companies active or interested in Honduras. Not only will it eliminate the vast majority of Honduran tariffs, but it will help raise the profile of Canadian businesses in the country and further deepen and strengthen Canada's commercial and economic relationship with Honduras. The Canada-Honduras Free Trade Agreement will also make us competitive with players from the U.S. and the EU who already enjoy, thank you, Mr. Speaker, who already enjoy free trade with Honduras, not to mention giving Canadian companies a secure and predictable framework for business. And I think the Minister, in responding to a question earlier, commented on one Canadian company that has 20,000 employees, Mr. Speaker, employing Hondurans and helping to raise the standard of living for them. In my remarks, I've highlighted how this Conservative government is proactively addressing the needs of Canadian business, both globally and in the dynamic region of the Americas. I think it's also clear that Canada-Honduras Free Trade Agreement will create new opportunities for Canadian companies in the Honduran market. Moving this agreement forward responds to the needs of Canadian companies. It's yet another step in support of our growth and prosperity agenda. And for these reasons, Mr. Speaker, I hope that all of our honourable colleagues will support the ratification of this free trade agreement with Honduras. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Question et commentaire, l'honorable député des Beauport, Lunney.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Écoutez, c'est vraiment à la grande honte des Canadiens. On est en train de faire la promotion d'un projet de traité de libre-échange en se cachant derrière de prétendues créations d'emplois, de création d'activités économiques, mais en taisant pendant ce temps-là les meurtres quotidiens qui se produisent un peu partout dans ce petit pays, c'est même un très petit pays, toute la répression, en fait, la négation des droits humains qui ont cours malheureusement, parce qu'il ne faut pas oublier que depuis le coup d'État de 2009, ce pays n'a jamais été capable de se relever du déficit démocratique qu'il vit. C'est absolument incroyable, Monsieur le Président, en plus, on va le dire, là, on va se parler clairement, d'être carrément bâillonné, que notre droit de parole soit carrément nié par ce gouvernement pour prétendument encore accélérer le processus d'adoption d'un traité de ce genre-là. Alors, comment mon collègue peut-il défendre ce genre de comportement de sa part?
The honourable member for Nanaimo, Alberni.
Well, I think the member, typical of the NDP, is opposed to trade agreements in general, Mr. Speaker. And what he fails to appreciate is the fact that part of our North-South agreement is to help develop governance capacity in the nations we're engaging with. We're investing through our aid programs in helping to build justice, train them in justice, to help train police forces, to help build governance capacity. These are all important measures in helping to stabilize any country, and by providing employment and creating employment opportunities for Canadian businesses to interact, we want to help establish best practices, to help them understand how proper labor arrangements work and what stable employment can provide for people in terms of economic opportunity to create a stable society. So that's what the free trade arrangements are about. If we waited for countries to be perfect, well, a lot of countries would miss an opportunity to get a hand up to a better level of life. And Canada's had a very successful democracy, Mr. Speaker. There are people who think we haven't got it quite right yet. It's a work in progress, but we're trying to help those that are further behind to come up to a better level. Thank you, Mr.
Questions and comments? L'honorable député de la Salima.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'ai entendu le discours qui vient d'être prononcé par un des députés du gouvernement. Puis ma question est la suivante. J'aimerais savoir comment se fait-il qu'après avoir signé plusieurs traités de libre-échange sous ce gouvernement, le Canada soit passé d'un excédent commercial de 26 milliards de dollars à un déficit de la balance commerciale du Canada de 62 milliards de dollars. Comment se fait-il qu'il continue de se fermer les yeux, de croiser les bras quand des entreprises ferment pour aller délocaliser des emplois ailleurs et également, encore une fois, se ferme les yeux, se croise les bras quand on a l'achat des ressources naturelles canadiennes par des sociétés d'État étrangères. Alors, j'aimerais savoir comment se fait-il qu'on continue à faire la promotion de ces traités-là.
The honourable member for Nanaimo, Alberni.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for her question. You know, the reality is that I think exports create about 35% of the economic opportunity in Canada and the employment in Canada. So we see this as an opportunity, which unfortunately our friends opposite fail to appreciate, that in fact by creating opportunities for our Canadian companies to engage in other parts of the world, it expands trade. They were opposed to the North American Free Trade Agreement, Mr. Speaker. On their side of the House, they're opposed to every free trade agreement we bring in. They said it would be a disaster. They said it would be terrible for Canada, but in fact, NAFTA brought great opportunity to Canada, and so has every other trade opportunity. I just mentioned in my speech, Mr. Speaker, that our trade with the North-South axis has increased 32% in the last few years. That creates opportunities, and opportunities are what we need to do in a very competitive world, Mr. Speaker. That's why on our side of the House we support engaging with other nations. It is one of our best opportunities to help them with governance capacity, to help them with aid, to help them develop economic opportunities in their own nations. Canada has expertise. We want to share that with the world and create opportunities for our own business at the same time.